Hey folks, Brian Bledsoe with you here once again, host of the Desert Farmer podcast. Hope you're having a great Wednesday afternoon. Good to be with you again. First, before we get started today, I just want to give a huge shout out to everybody in the West and Southwest High Plains yesterday that had to battle the awful wildfires, particularly areas around Lyman, near Hugo, extending down to Southwest Kansas, Turpin, near Liberal, Beaver, Hooker, Ashland. That community obviously been through the ringer as far as this wildfire is concerned, and much appreciation to everybody that aided in battling those wildfires yesterday because it is such an awful type of a setup when you're dealing with that type of wind and the dry vegetation that we have out there. It makes those wildfires basically, not fightable. You just have to basically just do structured triage, hope for the best, do what you can, let the wind settle down, and then you can make some serious dents. So a lot of those communities, it's just volunteer fire department. And I know a lot of you folks down there in Southwest Kansas who I personally do work for, and in the panhandles in eastern Colorado and all across the western high plains, either are currently a part of those volunteer fire departments or have been a part of them in the past. So I just want to give a big salute to you. Fortunately, no loss of life yesterday due to those fires. We had 5 people killed on I-25 south of Pueblo yesterday due to the blowing dirt and the terrible wind that was going on. So a very sad situation there. But on a day like yesterday, I know it's hard to imagine, but it could have been so much worse depending on where those wildfires actually got started. So bad enough as it is. I don't want to belabor the point here, but I just want to give a big shout out to you folks and just know that you're all in my family's thoughts and prayers while that recovery continues to take place. So what contributed to this kind of stuff? Depends on what you're looking at online, social media, or whatever. But I'm going to break things down for you. And basically, what has continued to make it conducive for rapid growth as far as wildfires. We are entering a very windy time of year. That's just the case from February through March, April, and even in early May. And when you have vegetation out there that has been grown up by what has been a very average to wetter than average year here in the plains. This is what it looks like for the past year. You get a lot of growth, and that growth and that vegetation can easily dry out. But you look at the precipitation anomalies here, since last February, and you can see what's gone on here. Average to above average precip across the majority of the area. Now, the past 60 days look a little bit different. All right. We've been very dry in this corridor that I'm highlighting right here. And in many cases, with the way these storm systems come through, that area of east and northeast New Mexico, parts of West Texas, the panhandles, and on up into southwest Kansas, a lot of times we'll see some of the worst wind. And we had wind gusts over 70 miles per hour yesterday in places like Lyman, extending eastward, not Lyman, but Lamar, extending eastward over toward Ulysses, Elkhart, Liberal, all through the Oklahoma Panhandle. And that's really what contributed to a lot of what was going on with the fire situation yesterday. But they're not the only dry areas. This area right here has been exceptionally dry too, from east and southeast Wyoming through western Nebraska and northeast portions of Colorado. And sandwiched in the middle here, we've been doing obviously better. But unless we get some serious moisture in these areas, this wildfire situation is not going to go away because we will see more wind events. We're seeing one today out there. And just to put this in perspective, back in late February of 2024, the Smokehouse Creek fire burned over 1 million acres in the Texas Panhandle. I know that is very fresh on the minds of a lot of folks in the Western High Plains when that wildfire went there. So we are in a prime time of year that we oftentimes have to deal with this, especially when we had a year prior that helped to grow up a lot of that vegetation. We've dried it out. We don't have any snow cover, and that vegetation is very ripe to burn when we get wind. Have we seen this stuff before? 100% we have. Many, many, many times. Will we see it again? Absolutely we will, because that's just part of the business of living in the Western High Plains. So I know the folks that live there are no stranger to this. You know that this is not abnormal. But when you have a bunch of outsiders looking in, telling you the reasons that this stuff happens, they should just shut their mouth. In my opinion, we know what this is about. We've dealt with it before. We'll deal with it again, and that's what makes us the people that we are in the place that we actually live in. And if you look at the current short-term drought index, it isn't horrendous across most of the area, but we have problems, especially here, and then even extending eastward on up in parts of the Midwest. But it's really this area here, okay, at least east of the mountains, that is problematic. And we're going to get some help here across parts of east and southeast Wyoming and Nebraska over the next 48 hours or so. And I'll talk more about that here in just a moment. But in terms of short-term drought index, there are some places that are still going to have some problems going forward because the weather pattern just isn't conducive to delivering a lot of moisture to most of those areas that desperately need help. So, with that in mind, let's look at that next weather maker that's going to make way across the plains. As we head in the back half of this week. So we'll look at a future radar animation today at noon Mountain Time, and we'll continue it through Friday morning, 5 o'clock. And we've got, some blizzard conditions going on up here across eastern North Dakota, northeast South Dakota, and into Minnesota with that big system that came out of the Rockies yesterday and gave us that big dose of wind. We have more energy coming into Utah and Colorado. So that's developing snow showers today. And watch what happens as we put this into motion. This low pressure is going to track from northeast Colorado right along the Kansas Nebraska line, and it's going to spread snow very late tonight and through the daytime hours tomorrow from west to east, right there across Nebraska and into Iowa, and then eventually into the Great Lakes. I'll let this go through a couple of more times. There will be a very, very sharp cutoff on the southwest side. So if you live up here in northeast Colorado, especially in places like Sterling, Holyoke, Julesburg, Haxton, those areas extending eastward over toward Imperial, you're on the southwest side of this. You're probably going to see some snow with some wind out of this deal. But the farther northeast you go, all right, and that's especially true through this corridor here, okay, right through here, this is where you're probably going to get bullseye before it extends farther east into west and northwest Iowa and then eventually pushes eastward. And you kind of see that there by some of those darker blue colors where the heavier snow is going to be impactful. If you live down here in northwest and north central Kansas, you may see a little bit of light snow out of this deal, but it doesn't look like it's going to be that big of a deal. It's really from east and southeast Wyoming and across Nebraska and into Iowa that's probably going to bear the brunt of this thing. So if we look at forecast total liquid and snow potential here, you can see that's the strike that we've got that we've going to be worried about here. And there will be wind gusts. There will be a strong north wind on the backside of this, 30, 35 miles per hour. So across a good part of Nebraska tomorrow, especially and then into western Iowa on Friday, this sector right here, pretty much along and north of I-80, you could see some mini blizzard-like conditions out of this storm system. So if you're calving, you got livestock, you've got today to get prepared. But don't sleep on this storm system. I've been very active in alerting any stockman in the state of Nebraska, as well as the Nebraska Cattlemen's Association, to try to get this information out there because we haven't had really any active weather to this point, aside from some wind. And when you see a storm system like this come through, a lot of times it can sneak up on folks. So if we look at snow potential here through Friday morning, this is essentially what you get. That's the stripe where that snow. This stuff up here is taking place, today. But it's this stripe here across east and southeast Wyoming, southwest South Dakota, and a good chunk of Nebraska and western Iowa. And you see that bullseye right here. Now, I don't necessarily want you to focus on the numbers. Just know that that's bullseye right there is where you could possibly see, greater than 5 inches of snow out of this. And in combination with the wind, it's going to be a nasty day tomorrow across Nebraska because it's going to get colder, quite a bit colder than what we've been accustomed to. All right. Let's look at the upper level weather pattern through February 25th. All right. And this takes into account this upcoming storm system. And you can see this very deep trough. I'm going to try to draw the pattern here. Okay. This is essentially, look at how contorted this pattern is at times. All right. Big cold trough across the western part of the country. Little ripples kicking out. Here's the one that came through yesterday, right there. There's another one rounding the base here, and there'll be another one that kicks through on the back side of this. So there will be pieces of energy that come out here. And if I put this into motion, you can see that taking place. There's the one coming through tomorrow. There's the one that comes through Friday, Saturday. And then we kind of relax the pattern and we actually build a pretty significant ridge back across the mountain, the Intermountain West and the Western Plains there as we head into next week before we break that ridge down again. And another piece of energy tries to take aim at us, farther from the west. And that's still a long ways out there. But the pattern in general is pretty active, a lot more active than what it was. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to deliver significant moisture to everybody. A lot of times, this activity just means with the jet stream getting more active and moving through, we get more bouts of wind. All right, more frequent temperature changes, so on and so forth. So, when I'm sending information out to my clients every single day, I'm trying to alert them, what these different dangers or risks are going to be as this weather pattern changes. Because as we fast forward things here through the rest of February and head into March, we know March can be often a pretty wild time. So when we look at the forecast temperature and precipitation anomaly through February 25th, this is what you get. Temperature wise, quite a bit cooler than where we've been. And a lot of this cooler than average here will be front loaded, over the next, 3 to 4 days. And then that ridge will build back in. But we've knocked those warm anomalies down here across Texas, for the most part here over the next 7 days. It won't be as warm until you get down into far South Texas, where again, a lot of that cold air isn't going to make it to. But Montana, the Dakotas, quite a bit colder. You've got some snowpack on the ground for a change, not deep snowpack for most areas, but it's still there. All right. And the precipitation anomalies, again, show you where the dryness is. All right. Look at Southeast Colorado, Southwest Kansas. And just again, I always bring this point home. In order to trigger the brown here on the anomaly map, you have to be 2/10 of an inch below average or greater. Okay. The more negative, obviously, the more brown that it triggers. So even though, all right, we're not in the brown, that's Lamar right there, 1400s below average. This time of year, we're still not seeing a lot of moisture. So that essentially means to me that pattern's going to be pretty dry through that time frame. Doesn't mean we can't see a little bit of stuff come through here, during the day on Saturday, late Friday and into Saturday, but I don't think it's going to be meaningful moisture here, at least in the grand scheme of things, over Southeast Colorado and Southwest Kansas. Amarillo, 1/4 inch below average. Lubbock, 3/10 of an inch below average. And then you get farther east, all right, and you see those bigger anomalies, negative anomalies. Farther north and northwest, those anomalies are lesser, but it's not exactly a wet pattern for these areas up here. All right. Now, let's look at the pattern from the 25th to March 4th, actually getting into early March here. Excuse me. And this is where we start out on the 25th, the end of the 25th. So you've got trough coming down like this, and then just kind of a flat flow, all right, that does something like this. So most of whatever energy is coming in probably stays quite a ways north. And down here to the south, all right, we're underneath a ridge that's down here over western Mexico and the Baja. So you're basically just getting flow like this, all right, around that ridge, which is basically coming in from the Pacific, all right. And with the energy farther north, it doesn't bode well to see a lot of moisture producing systems for those areas in the southwest and western high plains. The better prospects are likely going to be farther north. But like I said, even then, this isn't an excessively wet pattern once you get east of the mountains here. But notice this big cold trough here across, most of Canada. And if we put this into motion, you kind of see how it evolves a little bit. We start to see that trough again kind of reload back up over Western Canada, but it doesn't necessarily dig. What happens is we get this ridge to build in here again near California, and it kind of reverts to what the pattern has been like off and on through, the first part of this year. So that doesn't scream wet either. So my message here is that if we're looking for significant moisture, and I mean significant moisture, not just maybe a hit or miss system here, but significant moisture to be deposited in the west and southwest high plains and in the southern plains, I'll tell you what, in my opinion, we're just going to have to keep looking. And I've talked about this a lot already in not only in my individual work that I do for the folks that I work for, whether you're a individual farmer or rancher, or whether you're an insurance company or whatever. But this pattern with the way our oceans are transitioning is very typical for this time of year. And that's why I've been talking about how March probably wasn't going to be excessively wet across the southwest part of the country or the west and southwest high plains. Talk more about that in just a second. Forecast temperature and precipitation anomaly, though, from the 25th through the 4th looks like this. We will warm back up again as that ridge comes in. And you see, because of that flow, we're under the influence of the north side of that ridge extending out of Mexico. You can see where the warmer anomalies are down here across eastern New Mexico, most of Texas, Oklahoma, south and southwest Kansas. There's warm anomalies farther north, yes, but the core of the warmth is likely going to be down here for that 7 day period. And the anomalies tell the story. All right. Likely dry. Those same anomalies there in southeast Colorado, southwest Kansas, down to the panhandles, eastern New Mexico. Again, you can see where those dry anomalies are most prevalent, right through here. Farther north, those anomalies are less, but you still see some negatives up here. Like I said, doesn't scream wet. The wet areas likely here. And I think that could possibly be where the wet areas also set up as we head into March. Farther east, much like what it did last year at this time, especially along the Mississippi Valley and farther east, which kind of bucks some of the analog information I'm going to show you here in just a second. Speaking of which, let's look at the latest Bureau of Meteorology. This is out of Australia, ENSO forecast, looking at whether we're going to be, rapidly developing this El Nino or not. And this is the relative Nino index. All right. This is a new metric that is becoming more mainstream. It basically kind of looks at the way the oceans are now and where the ENSO region is warm or cold, and then it subtracts that from the rest of the tropics, and that kind of gives you the balance of this what this index is about. So right now, and again, the BOM has a little different metric than NOAA does. So the threshold to meet La Nina or El Nino, okay, negative 0.8 degrees C or positive 0.8 degrees C. So anything above this dashed red line is technically El Nino territory. NOAA's is positive 0.5. All right, so it's lesser. So if you just use the Bureau of Meteorology here and you come out here to May, we are right there in El Nino threshold by May. And we are rapidly changing. It is really about how rapidly we change that I think is the most important thing here. And you see all of these gray lines. They're all different members of the model looking at the same thing. And they're in pretty good agreement here, at least through May. And to be honest with you, they're in pretty good agreement in and out here toward July and even in August. But the rate of change here is going to be significant from now right through May. And that's, in my opinion, is what is going to help to facilitate the weather pattern getting more active. But if you take the metric of NOAA, okay, which is about right there, we could basically be borderline El Nino by April. That's kind of the forecast and way it looks right now. No huge changes here. We've talked a lot about that on the Desert Farmer podcast. I've talked a lot about this on Twitter, Facebook, to you individually, whatever. We are still going forward with this for the reasons that I've laid out for you. And this forecast run was just updated on Valentine's Day, so just a few days ago. So it's very current. So let's look at these potential precipitation anomaly analogs March through May. All right, with the way this transition is going. And this is how March has shaped up with all these analogs. I've shown these to you before. They're all up here at the top. Some of them may be a little bit better, some of them not so much. We're going to have to figure that out in the next month or so based on the speed of what's going on. I've made no mistake about talking about how 2023 was one of my favorites. For a whole host of reasons. And I'll go over 2023 in a little bit more detail here in a minute. But these are the way the Marches averaged out. And if you look at the scale down here, it's not tremendous. Okay, we're just a tick below average here, but there was a noticeable dry signal, all right, through these areas in the plains, as well as down along parts of the Gulf Coast, the Southeast, and up the Mid-Atlantic during these marches. So it should come as no surprise if we end up being drier than average, or if the modeling takes us to be drier than average based on what the pattern is right now and based on how it should be with all these years. March should be drier than average here based on what is happening in the pattern and the oceans that are changing and the way that they are changing. All right. I'm hoping that this isn't the case. All right. Because that means we've still got at least another month to go before things could really, you know, turn potentially into our favor. Speaking of which, let's look at those Aprils. All right. See how the dry signal reduced? We are still somewhat in it here across parts of Northeast Colorado, Northwest Kansas, Nebraska, and then points eastward in parts of the Corn Belt and the Mississippi Valley. Look what happened to Texas here. Texas got wetter. All right. Southern Oklahoma got wetter. We started bringing more storms into California and through the Intermountain West, and we were also wetter up here across parts of the Dakotas. So that noticeable dry signal in the middle part of the country was beat back, but it's still there somewhat. All right. So we have to be cognizant of that. But notice how the turn was here in Texas, especially by the time we got into April. And there is some computer model data out there, all right, that I've shown you that would actually extend this wetter than average feel from Texas northeastward up here. Okay. So this is going to be something we're going to have to watch pretty closely because the analogs and the way they're behaving would keep things wetter farther west and southwest and drier here. I'm really interested to see how that model data compares going forward with what the analogs are looking at. This is why we look at this stuff every day. All right. To keep you on top of that. What happened in the May? Well, in May, we got wetter than average big time through this corridor here. All the way through the western high plains. Most of Texas was still wet. We got wetter in eastern New Mexico, Colorado, western Kansas, western Nebraska. We started to dry things out even more up here. And we were dry here. One of the main reasons is we had high pressure up here, bringing drier air down, all right, from northeast Canada. So it kind of really squelched things here. And this is again based on history and what we've been looking at with these years, and that does include 2023. And I remember 2023 very well, where we had to overcome that early season dryness here in the Corn Belt. And in some cases, it never was overcome here in eastern Nebraska and western or eastern portions of Kansas. Never made it. But the rains really came and showed up by late July and in August. The same thing happened in 2018, which is why we didn't have a catastrophe as far as the corn crop was concerned for the most part. But in May, the main message that I continue to see over and over and over again in all of these years is how active, all right, how active really this corridor ended up being. So in Southwest Kansas, are in the Panhandles, are we going to have to wait until May to see this deliver? I think there's potential that we could really see the pattern change start once we get deeper into April. I think March is still going to be a struggle, as I've told you many, many times. I'm not changing my mind on that just yet. All right. But it does bring up some question marks here across the Corn Belt, because if the patterns that have happened in the past set up with this transition out of La Nina to El Nino, then we may have to worry about some dryness here, and the models may be overdone in terms of wetness. Something to watch. Speaking of 23, let's look at it. This is what our sea surface temperature anomalies look like right now. All right. We are warming things up here quite a bit. We still have some residual cool water at the surface. Beneath the surface, we do not have that. I've shown that to you before. All right. So beneath the surface, we are warming. All right. We are warmer here. Gulf of Alaska, west coast of North America, off the Baja to Hawaii. We are warming here. All right. We have a lot of warm water in the Western Pacific to send its way eastward. So the next time we get a significant westerly wind burst here, it's going to shove even more warm water farther east. And that's likely what will, further this transition. But I'm not just focused on the ENSO region here. I'm most focused on these sea surface temperature anomalies up here, which, okay, may be less warm here than we are here, All right. We're still really warm here off the coast of Japan, but we are still warmer than average here. And I think that that is one of the reasons why there is not this big, awful, nasty drought signal showing up anywhere within the modeling. And to be honest with you, even in the analogs that I showed you, after we get rid of some of that front loaded dryness, we spread that moisture out as we get deeper into summer. And that prohibits, a real wreck from happening. But that's what we're looking at right now. Compare that with 23. Do you see what happened in 23? Look at all the cooler than average water that was present here initially at the same time in 2023. Look at what we had to overcome here. But at that time, we had, warming water taking place here. We had warm water in the West Pacific. We had a pretty good warm plume here, but we were still very much negative PDO or cold PDO. Even when that El Nino happened in 2023, we never popped the PDO. All right. We never popped it. And I think the difference is here, and I'll go back one. All right. You can see now that's where we are now. That's where we were in 23. So this ENSO region was colder at this time in 23 than where we are now. I think we're farther ahead. All right. We're ahead of the game here when we're comparing it to 2023, is my point. And that gives me some reason for optimism that might happen a little bit sooner than maybe what had happened in 2023. So if we go back and look at the precipitation anomalies that took place in 23, March to May, all right, here's March. There's our dry signal. All right. There was our dry signal right here. We were a lot wetter than average here across the West. And the winter of 22-23 was a big one in the West. Haven't had that so far this year. We haven't had that. All right. We've had times when it's been crazy out here, but it just hasn't been consistent. So could we light things up in March? It's possible. All right. We'll have to wait and see. I don't think it's going to get lit up to the degree that it was in 2023, but I still think this area out here in the plains will be drier. And again, notice what happened in 23. We were wetter here. Remember, it kind of bucked the trend there. Remember those analogs that I showed you that had the dryness here in parts of the Corn Belt? But we were very wet through this corridor here in 2023. What about April? We dried out. You see that? We were wetter here. All right. And we were drier over a wide area here in April, all the way through these areas here. We're dry right out here in the Corn Belt. That is very on brand for what those analogs that I showed you. Drier east, starting to change farther west, but we were mostly the wettest across southeast Texas and farther east with that transition taking place to El Nino. May, we were drier out here again. And again, I think it had a lot to do with that drier air coming down from the north and northeast. And we really lit things up. All right. All the way through these sectors, through the Western High Plains. Kansas from west to east was very different that year. And it largely stayed very different through that entire year as we remained very active here across the Western High Plains that whole summer of 2023. So you see what I'm saying here, that while areas farther east need that moisture too, I am a little bit concerned at some of the analogs showing up that we might have to worry about this dryness early on. And I've said this time and time again, despite what the models are saying, we might have to worry about some early season dryness here across the Corn Belt. But I think the dryness that is existing now in the West and Southwest High Plains really starts to change by late April, and especially as we head into May. I still think we're on track for that. And I'm very interested to see what the latest computer model information shows up here in a couple of weeks once we get the new seasonal model information that comes in. Folks, I say this all the time, but if you are listening to me and you are an individual farmer, rancher, or in a company that watches this stuff and really wants to dial this stuff in from a weather standpoint, please reach out to me. I don't talk about my business a whole lot individually. I let the people that I work for talk about what I've done for them and what I'm still doing for them. So if I can help you in any way, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. if you feel like advertising here on the Desert Farmer podcast, please reach out to me about that. I can hook you up and we will get going. But aside from the information I shared with you today, if you're still battling that high fire danger, like I know a lot of you folks are, whether you're in Clayton or Dalhart or Texline or as far south as Clovis, Lubbock, Dimmitt, Hereford, Freona, I don't care. Those communities right now today are seeing some of the more high-end fire danger versus what we saw yesterday. So please be safe. I'll be chatting with you again real soon here on the Desert Farmer podcast. And yeah, have a great rest of your day. Take care.